My husband bought a villa for his mistress. I'm an engineer, enjoy your condemned house. In structural engineering, we are taught that catastrophic failure rarely happens overnight. It is almost never a sudden, unpredictable explosion. Instead, it is a quiet, creeping process of microscopic fractures, a slow accumulation of stress that goes unnoticed until the very foundation simply gives way. I found the first crack in my marriage on a Thursday morning, buried in a stack of misdelivered mail. It wasn't a lipstick-stained caller or a late-night text message. It was a heavily redacted loan disclosure document from a private lending firm, indicating that a second mortgage had been taken out on the home my husband and I owned free and clear. The borrowed amount was staggering, nearly $700,000. My name is Evelyn. I am 36 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have made my living calculating load paths, tensile strength, and soil stability for high-rise commercial developments. I am, by nature and by trade, a woman who relies on verifiable data. My husband, David, was a general contractor. He was a man of action, charismatic and bold, someone who always joked that engineers like me overthought everything while guys like him actually got things built. I used to find his brash competence intoxicating. I used to believe that our differences made us a perfectly balanced structure. I was the anchor, he was the sail. But standing in my kitchen, holding a piece of paper that legally bound my home to a massive, unauthorized debt, I felt the ground beneath me liquefy. I didn't scream. I didn't call him at his job site to demand answers. When you discover that the ground beneath your feet is giving way, sudden movements are the deadliest thing you can do. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and went to work. David had always managed our joint finances, a division of labor we agreed upon years ago because my hours at the firm were brutally long. It took me less than 3 hours to bypass his superficial passwords and access the depths of our accounts. What I found was a masterpiece of financial deception. For months, David had been systematically bleeding our savings, moving money through his business accounts to mask the trail. The second mortgage was the final piece of his puzzle. He had leveraged the equity of our primary residence to secure a massive down payment on a luxury property, a sprawling, mid-century modern vacation villa perched on a coastal bluff in Monterey. The title of the Monterey property wasn't just in his name. It was co-signed by a woman named Serena Vance. I didn't recognize the name, but a quick search pulled up her professional profile. Serena was a high-end real estate broker specializing in coastal luxury properties. She was also, as my deep dive into David's hidden social media activity quickly revealed, the woman he had been taking on weekend sourcing trips to Los Angeles for the past year and a half. There were photos of them drinking champagne on boat decks, standing uncomfortably close at industry galas, their smiles broadcasting a shared, arrogant secret. The entire blueprint of his betrayal laid itself out before me in perfect, agonizing clarity. David wasn't just having an affair, he was orchestrating an exit strategy. He was going to drain the equity from the home we built together, secure his dream life in a coastal villa with his beautiful, younger broker, and then file for divorce, leaving me trapped under a mountain of debt on a house I could no longer afford. He was going to collapse my life to build his own. The pain that hit me was blinding, a physical pressure in my chest that made it hard to draw breath. For 5 years, I had supported his business, co-signed his early loans, and worked 80-hour weeks so he could get his contracting firm off the ground. I had loved him with a fierce, quiet loyalty. To realize that he viewed me not as a partner, but as a financial resource to be mined and discarded, was a betrayal that defied language. But beneath the crushing weight of the heartbreak, a colder, harder instinct began to crystallize. David always said I overthought things. He was about to find out exactly what happens when a structural engineer applies her focus to a demolition project. I took 3 days off work. I didn't tell David I knew. I made him dinner, I asked about his day, and I watched him lie to my face with the smooth, practiced ease of a sociopath. On the 4th day, when he told me he had to drive up to Sacramento for a site inspection, I knew he was heading to Monterey. I waited an hour, got into my own car, and followed the coast south. The villa was located at the end of a winding, private drive, flanked by ancient cypress trees and overlooking the violent, beautiful crash of the Pacific Ocean. I parked a quarter-mile down the road and hiked up through the brush, carrying a pair of high-powered binoculars and a digital level. From a vantage point hidden in the tree line, I watched David and Serena walking the property line. She was pointing out the infinity pool, laughing, hanging onto his arm. He looked at her like she was the center of his universe. I waited in the biting coastal wind until they finally got into his truck and drove away. Then, I bypassed the locked gate and walked onto the property. At first glance, it was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass, sleek concrete finishes, cantilevered decks jutting out over the cliffside. It was exactly the kind of flashy, arrogant architecture David worshipped. But I wasn't looking at the finishes. I was looking at the bones. Almost immediately, my trained eyes caught the subtle, fatal inconsistencies. The expansive concrete driveway had a brand new slurry seal over it, a common cosmetic trick used to hide widespread cracking. I walked to the edge of the cantilevered deck and knelt down. The support columns were anchored into a retaining wall that looked solid, but when I ran my hand along the base, I felt the unmistakable texture of fresh, rapid-set epoxy. Someone had recently patched massive shear cracks. I pulled a plumb bob from my bag and measured the angle of the main retaining wall. It was leaning outward by a margin of 3 degrees. To a layman, 3 degrees is invisible. To a structural engineer, 3 degrees on a coastal cliffside is a death sentence. I spent the next 2 hours crawling under the subfloor, measuring the soil gradation, and documenting the stress fractures in the foundation slab. The story the house told me was far more fascinating, and far more damning, than the story of my husband's affair. This bluff wasn't just settling, it was actively subsiding. The entire property was built on a localized fault of poorly compacted shale and sandstone, and the heavy winter rains were rapidly accelerating the soil liquefaction. The house was slowly, inevitably sliding into the ocean. I drove back to my office and pulled the geological survey maps and the county permit history for the parcel. What I found made me laugh out loud in the empty, dark office. Serena Vance wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a predator. She was the listing agent for a property that had been languishing on the market for 3 years because every competent inspector had flagged the subsidence issue. The original owners had abandoned it, desperate to offload the liability. Serena, facing a dead-end listing that was about to be red-tagged by the county, had found the perfect mark. David was a contractor, yes, but he was a builder of aesthetic remodels, not a geotechnical expert. He was driven by ego and blinded by lust. Serena had used her body and her charm to convince my arrogant husband that he was getting a secret, off-market steal. She convinced him to bypass a formal geological inspection, likely framing it as a way to close fast and secure their love nest. She didn't love him. She was using him as a financial dumping ground to secure her massive commission and shield herself from legal liability before the cliff gave way entirely. David thought he was the mastermind, playing 2 women. In reality, he was the biggest fool in the room. The next morning, I met with the most vicious divorce attorney in the city. I presented him with a meticulously documented dossier of David's financial fraud, the forged signatures on the secondary mortgage, and the diverted business funds. Because David had fraudulently leveraged our primary residence, my attorney immediately filed an emergency injunction, freezing all of David's assets and legally severing my financial liability from his unauthorized debts. We quietly transferred my half of our legitimate liquid assets into an impenetrable private trust. Then, I put on my hard hat. I drafted a 40-page structural integrity assessment of the Monterey Villa. I included high-resolution photographs of the patched shear cracks, the 3-degree tilt of the retaining wall, and the historical geological data proving imminent catastrophic failure. I cross-referenced the state building codes, proving that the structure was an immediate threat to human life. I didn't sign it with my name, I signed it with the seal of an anonymous, concerned licensed engineer, and I overnighted it directly to the chief building official of Monterey County, a man known for his merciless adherence to the law. The fallout was swifter and more devastating than I could have ever calculated. 3 days later, David came home. He walked through the front door, his face a ghostly, sickly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world evaporate. I was sitting at the dining table, sipping a cup of black coffee, a manila envelope resting in front of me. "Evelyn," he choked out, his voice trembling. "We have a problem. A massive problem." "Do we?" I asked, my voice calm, perfectly level. He collapsed into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. The bank. The business accounts are frozen. I don't understand what's happening. And I made an investment. Without telling you. I'm so sorry, Evie, I was trying to surprise you. I bought a vacation house in Monterey. The audacity of the lie almost made me smile. A surprise for me? Yes. But it's a disaster, he panicked, his eyes wild. The county just red-tagged it. Some inspector showed up this morning. They condemned the property, Evie. They said the cliff is collapsing. The bank caught wind of the condemnation and they're calling the loan due immediately. I used our house for the down payment. We're going to lose everything. He reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, looking for the supportive, dependable wife who had always fixed his messes. I pulled my hand back, out of his reach. I know about the house, David, I said softly. I also know about Serena. He froze. The panic in his eyes shifted instantly to absolute, paralyzing terror. Evelyn. I know you took out the mortgage to buy a house with your mistress, I continued, my voice never rising, delivering the facts with the clinical precision of a coroner. I know you were planning to leave me with the debt. But here is what you didn't know. I slid the manila envelope across the table. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were the divorce papers, the emergency financial injunction protecting my assets, and a copy of the structural report I had sent to the county. Serena didn't love you, David. She played you, I said, watching his eyes dart over the engineering report, the realization of his own stupidity dawning on him in real time. She had an unsellable, condemned property that was about to ruin her career, and she found an arrogant contractor who was too busy sleeping with her to check the soil stability. You bought a $6 million tombstone on a sinking cliff. You did this, he whispered, staring at the report, his voice hollow. You reported it. I protected the public from a hazardous structure, I replied coolly. Just like I protected myself from you. Serena blocked my number, he said, the words spilling out of him as if he were in shock. When the county showed up, I tried to call her to explain. She blocked me. Her brokerage said she's on an extended leave of absence. Of course she did. She got her commission, and you got the liability. I stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt. My lawyer has secured the equity of this house. Because you forged my signature on the second mortgage, the bank cannot touch my half, and you are facing potential federal wire fraud charges if you try to fight it. You are going to sign those divorce papers, David. You are going to walk out that door, and you are going to take your sinking house and your bankrupt business with you. He sat there in the silent kitchen, a broken, empty man, staring at the blueprints of his own destruction. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. The structural integrity of his ego had completely failed, crushed under the weight of his own lies. I walked out of the house that day and never looked back. I heard through mutual acquaintances that David eventually declared bankruptcy. The county forced him to pay for the demolition of the Monterey villa to prevent it from sliding into the ocean and causing an environmental disaster. He lost his business, his reputation, and the woman he had thrown his marriage away for. As for me, I bought a beautiful, historic brownstone in the city. I spent 6 months meticulously restoring it, reinforcing the brickwork, updating the electrical, and ensuring the foundation was solid as bedrock. I rebuilt my life exactly the way I build my high-rises, with patience, with precision, and with the absolute certainty that no one will ever be able to tear it down. Sometimes, the most beautiful things can only be built after you clear away the wreckage of a lie.